Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Explain 12 deep dive video. And I am joined today by Ben Supnick.
Thanks for having me back.
Of course, I mean, where would Explain be without your brain knowledge and typing power?
It would have less bugs. I think we have a bug base, and you can prove it because you can look at my name and you can look at the bugs. And I have learned that
Ben,
in
Ben, Ben, Ben,
hindsight,
Ben, Ben.
I should have written the code right the first time. My computer science professor told me that 30 years ago. He said, if we just didn't write bugs in the first place, we wouldn't have to spend all our time fixing bugs. And we all thought he was crazy, but it turns out he was just years and years and years ahead of his time.
Well, I'm sure outside of the bugs, we also have lots of things to be thankful for your contributions towards Explain 12. And hopefully, we're going to touch on some of those elements in this episode. So, this is episode number 7 of a pretty extraordinary and long journey of deep dives into Explain 12. And I think it's really important that some of the stuff we talk about today didn't really fit kind of into some of the other segments, but they are just as important and are definitely worth talking about. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the user interface and kind of the user experience of using Explain 12. We're going to talk a little bit about third parties and also the SDK as well for kind of any of those budding developers who are looking to get involved with Explain development in the future, which is going to be pretty exciting. So if people want to find out a little bit more about you, Ben, they can kind of watch some of the previous content we've put out. I don't want to talk a little bit about that again because that's already out there. But I really just want to start this conversation a little bit about the kind of the thought process behind your design decisions in terms of the user interface and what people can expect from Explain 12, maybe from over Explain 11.
Right. So a lot of the times when we put a new feature into a major version, it's a big change, right? So in Explain 10, we said it's time to upgrade the auto gen. We don't think our approach is even remotely what it should be. We can do so much better. And we came up with a completely new auto gen system, right? With Explain 11, we redid the user interface pretty much from the ground up, from first principles with completely new code. And in Explain 12, the cloud and the weather system is an example of this, where we said, technologies move forward, we can do something totally different. But with the user interface, that wasn't the case. Tyler and Aaron did a fantastic job with the user interface in Explain 11 and really solved the problem of Explain being hard to use, being difficult to configure, being intimidating for new users. So this was a case where we got to build on strength. And one of the goals was keep the things that were really working well. So the goal there was incremental improvement. How can we make this more functional, especially in areas where we've added new features? What user interface do we need to bring out all the new stuff like air traffic control and weather that's new to Explain 12? And we also went for a new look that updates the sim and I think plays well thematically with Explain 12. We had some internal discussions, and Daniela had some prototypes with this kind of nice translucent look. And we actually looked at this all the way back in pre-V11. We had prototypes of this back then too, and we said, no, we like this kind of dark blue look. But when we got the new look working with the new lighting engine, the two really work together because so much of Explain 12 is driven by light really being a thing, light being something that we treat physically, just like we do air for the flight model. And so once we had that, seeing that lightness come through the UI, it kind of clicked. So we went with that look. And then we said, okay, how do we make this work with the air traffic control system? How do we give the air traffic control system a major UI upgrade because we have so much functionality here? How do we make sure that all the different subsystems are playing well? So it's incremental, but I think it plays well with almost every other part of the sim.
Is there anything that really stands out between what you had in Explain 11 and Explain 12 that maybe users who are so familiar with the old platform who are coming to this new platform that should kind of keep an eye out for? Maybe things have moved that you want to talk about?
I don't think there's going to be any who moved my cheese muscle memory doesn't work. Like if you can get in and configure your flight, I think you're not going to be annoyed. The biggest change is with the air traffic control system, where that got a major overhaul. That was one area where we didn't love the way that the UI worked in the past, and the new system is a lot more fluid. And the really big win is it's all on the joystick if you want it to be. And when I'm testing it, I get my hat switch and my trigger configured, and you can fly much more like a pilot, because a real pilot, they can trigger ATC and talk while they've got their hands on the controls, and there's no more need to go off and grab the mouse. So that's an area where it's different, but I think it's going to be an improvement for pretty much anyone who has hardware.
Awesome. So I have a feeling that many people will want to know as well, in terms of VR support, what's the UI interface like for those users? Is it much different, or is it improved? What can you tell us about that?
We've tried to keep it the same as X-Plane 11 in that it's the X-Plane 11 UI mapped into VR, hopefully at a scale where it's extremely usable with touch controllers. We actually were having a discussion about this the other day, because a lot of VR apps, they give you a 10-foot tall window and it's really epic. And our UI is only about 6 feet tall. Well, why aren't we being grand about it? And the answer is our UI is scaled originally for the desktop with a mouse, which is an extremely precise pointing device. Now, a control in your hand is extremely precise, right? That's why you can do things in the world. But if you put the UI 10, 15, 20 feet away, now you're lasering it from afar, kind of like aiming a laser pointer. And that's a lot less precise, right? Very small motions will move that laser pointer. And a lot of VR titles get around that by having huge buttons, which is great. But since our UI isn't like that, we really have to think about the usability first. And so we're trying to have something that remains just as usable and will not be annoying to configure, because you don't want to be sitting there fighting with the sliders. You want to get flying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from kind of my experience of X-Plane 12, the UI, it just works. It's very seamless. Like you said, there are a few differences, but in terms of that muscle memory and what you think about, there isn't too much you need to really consider. And I think Austin said it best a couple of weeks ago when I was speaking to him. The whole point is you just load the sim, click a few buttons, and you fly. And the whole experience is meant to be very smooth and easy to do.
That's exactly right. If you're thinking about the UI, there's a fair chance something's gone horribly wrong. The installer is the same way. Like it is unsexy work. No one wants to do it, but God forbid the installer goes wrong. Like, that's a support call. You just want to fly the sim. So a lot of effort goes into these systems that try to remain unglamorous and just work so that you can get to flying.
So actually, you bring up a really good point about the installer as well. So when we installed it, and then we're talking kind of betas, and I'm not sure what the future will hold, but you had to select like the regions and stuff. So anyone who's new to X-Plane, is that kind of a normal thing? And what's the reasoning behind that sort of system?
Right. We have you select regions, and there's two reasons. One is we download the region, so maybe you don't want to wait extra hours to download Siberia. Maybe you're not going to fly there. Different people like different parts of the world or want to fly in different parts of the world. So we're trying to get people flying faster. Especially, I mean, I'm lucky I have fiber to my office, but if you might be on a mobile connection, you might have data limits, and so you need to keep your download small. And you can always go back and pick up another region later when you're ready for it. And it also saves hard drive space. A lot of people want to run X-Plane on an SSD. SSDs are getting more plentiful, but it's not like physical hard drives where terabytes and terabytes are the norm. So we're letting people pick what they want, and you can always go back and add more. Or if you say, I need to free up some hard drive space, you can dump a continent and get it back later.
Different continent.
Yeah, maybe you're not feeling good about Australia. Boom, they're gone, right?
Off they go.
Yes.
Very cool. All right. So, I mean, UI installers, I mean, it's not the most glamorous things. Like you said, it's unsexy to talk about, but it's still kind of important, and it's still part of the experience of X-Plane 12. But I think what a lot of people will be very interested to know a little bit more about is kind of these third-party add-ons. And I'm sure there are plenty of people watching who have invested hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in X-Plane 11 content through hundreds of different stores or third-party add-ons, whether that be planes, sceneries, etc. So obviously third-party support is a very, very important element to any simulator platform, and in particular X-Plane 12. So what are you doing then as a simulator developer to make the experience for developers to bring their stuff over to Xplane 12 as easy and as efficiently as possible?
Right. So the biggest single thing we've done is put a lot of third parties into the private alpha testing program. I would guesstimate that probably three-quarters of the people in the early access, not excuse me, not early access, in the alpha program, the private alpha program, are third-party developers who can try their add-ons against the new SDK, against Xplane 12, and give us feedback about how it's working. We expect to have different levels of compatibility for different kinds of add-ons. It depends on what they're doing, and how much they've stayed within the lines of the SDK. And uh, so there's a lot of variance. We expect scenery packs will pretty much just work. One of the tricky things was to get orthophoto scenery packs working with the new water. At this point, we expect they will work. If you have an old orthophoto scenery pack, the waves will not be 3D because we don't know how far down the ocean floor is. And a wave goes up, but it comes back down again below where the water would be. And we don't want to see the seafloor peeking up through the bottom of the wave. That would break the illusion. But we do expect that you'll get the look of the waves, the lighting, and the physics interaction should all just work even for unmodified V11 orthophoto packs. We are working with third parties for V12 support where they add a little bit of data to their DSFs, and now they get the 3D as well, combined with orthophotos, as well as the ability to control the watercolor and kind of tint shallow areas. So I'm hoping we're going to have good test cases for that shortly, because we want to see the stuff work too. And sometimes you just need a big orthophoto pack to really know how it works. But the scenery situation is pretty good. Most of the features are opt-in. Like you can opt into using the new dynamic snow and weather effects. You can opt into seasons. I think we're going to be able to share our season data with third parties. So in the new scenery system, we have dynamic seasons. Elements in the library have different looks for leaves on versus the winter. But how do you know when winter is, right? That's actually regional. So it's summer here, but down in South America where Danielle is, it's winter, right? So the sim can't just say, hey, July, summer. So instead, every scenery tile has the data encoded for the date range when the seasons hit for that region. And this covers both four-season climates like, the Northeast where we have real seasons, and then two-season climates like California, where it's kind of like we have the wet season and the dry season. It never really gets cold. Either way, you need the data. So I think we'll be able to share our data so that people who are making orthophoto packs can take those layers and just merge them in, and now they've got at least a base set. And if they want to do a better job, they want to really refine it, they can totally do that. But if they also are like, well, I just want to update my scenery pack, they can start with our data. For the aircraft people, we expect that a V11 aircraft will fly in X-Plane 12, but we do not expect that a highly tuned paper add-on will hit the numbers exactly the same in 12 as it did in 11, because the flight model has changed quite a bit. And we have a checklist document of all of the areas where we've improved the flight model, and now there's a tuning step to do. So, for example, the idle ratio of engines, you have to retune that. So you get your airplane in, and you get flying and you idle the engines, then you tune those ratios, which is actually a lot like what the actual mechanics do to the real airplanes. Like idle ratio is not a first principles thing. Some human has to tune something to decide how much fuel is going to come through when the throttle's all the way back, right? And a thing you can do is say, I'd like my airplane to idle a little hotter because I run the air conditioning all the time. I'm in the South, and I don't want those air conditioners dragging down the engine. So I actually want that out of the shop. So not that different from the real world, but that's the kind of retuning that will be needed. And once they do that, they should have aircraft that fly really, really well. OpenGL as a option for X-Plane is gone. We basically only work as if you check that box for Vulkan and Metal. So OpenGL for the plugins connected to Metal and Vulkan for the sim. So add-ons that required OpenGL to be running and Metal and Vulkan to be unchecked, they're not going to work in X-Plane 12. There are legacy APIs for graphics that we do not support in the new modern rendering engine. So not everything is completely compatible, but we've tried to make sure that major categories keep working. Pretty much all of the major plugin APIs still work. There's things that we've encouraged people not to use, like the hotkeys API from 2004. Like, I hope no one's still using that. Um, we don't expect that to keep working. And we actually finally got to something that we've wanted to do for a while, which is uh, so we have data refs, which are the named data outputs of Xplane. There's, I think we're up to 4,500 of them now. These are all different bits of information you can pull out of Xplane or you can send into Xplane. And we now have categories describing the level of support. So we have data refs that are supported. We have data refs where there's a rename and there's a better name that still works, but you should use the better name. And then we have deprecated, where we're planning to get rid of them. And if you want your add-on to keep working, like, it's like a yellow light in the traffic light. Like, this is going to turn red soon. You need to react to it. And we have this list. We can give plugins output in the log telling them what's happened. And Jim Keir put this in, and I think it's going to give add-on makers a lot better situational awareness, right? Like, they don't want to use old stuff, but they need to know what's new and what's old. So we actually have the tools to make this a lot better now.
Wow. Okay. And you talk about these third-party developers and the things you're doing to help them. What's their feedback been like so far in terms of, firstly, the support that you guys are giving them, and secondly, what are their thoughts on Xplane 12 as a platform for them to work on?
Right. So they're a picky bunch, and so they've given us a lot of feedback about the quality, which makes sense because they're trying to make add-ons that are really, really good. They're trying to get better than the default sim experience, because that's why you would get an add-on, is to enhance your sim. So we've been working with them to try to get the materials locked down. They're really taking the lighting and pushing it to the limit and saying, "Oh, I'm close to getting this material, but it's not quite right. Like, is this an X-Plane problem, or do I have to work around it?" And what we're trying to do is get those issues resolved as quickly as possible so that they can get to work on their add-on and not have this stuff like lingering later in the production process, right? But sometimes you fix a bug and it reveals new problems. So one of the most annoying bugs was flashing in the cockpit, right? The airplane is always moving, and as it would move, the reflections would change with aircraft motion. And Daniel Evans finally just killed this bug. Like, it's fixed. But now that it's fixed, people can really take a good look around the cockpit, and they're saying, "Oh, I've got a problem here. I didn't see it because of the flashing." So sometimes you have to work through the bugs just to find the other bugs. It's a process of smoothing out all the wrinkles, and we've put a lot of rendering features into this. So you know, we just have a lot of things to dot the i's, cross the t's, and really try and get the quality as good as it can be while maintaining frame rate. Right? We've also
Hmm.
told them, if you're doing an offline render in Blender and baking, Xplane's not going to look like that because you want to run at 60 FIPS, right? You don't want to wait for your screenshot. So we're limited by what's possible, but we're trying to make it as fast as possible and also as nice looking as possible.
Yeah, and I think from the conversations I've had with other third parties, they have appreciated having such a long time to be able to access the simulator and the capacity that they have in order to be able to test their add-ons and to build them up to an Xplane 12 standard. So yeah, I think once Xplane 12 comes out, those third-party add-ons will either be updated or come out quite quickly, I imagine, following the release.
Right. We hope so. And we've tried to give them, direct access to some of the teams so that they can get their questions answered. And one of the things we get a lot is there documentation on this new feature? And we're like, ish. Almost everything they use is what our team uses internally. Like, we don't have a secret second SDK that our artists get no. Like, what our art team is using is what they're using. So if a third party is stuck on something, there's a good chance that our art team is stuck too and has the same kinds of complaints. So the tools they're using are the tools we're using. And the only problem is, are the docs complete? Or there's still bugs in the tools? Everything is pretty complete, but it's not the same as it's done and out the door. So, we've had a push to try and get at least basic documentation on a whole lot of features. There was a lot of questions about how to use the rain system. And so Sydney had to stop fixing bugs and just churn out the doc to explain, all right, here's how you get that rain on the windshield. And at this point, the preliminary docs are getting to be in pretty good shape. But, with all those new features, there's just a lot to write as well.
I mean, you bring up a really good point, actually, and a question for you really is, how do you stop feature creeping from happening? Because obviously you're getting all this feedback from developers who are going, "Can I have this feature and that feature?" How do you go, "Yes, but that will come in the future because we really need to get this sim out the door and in the hands of those who are looking forward to it"?
Right. It's even harder because sometimes the line between a bug and a feature is really blurry. So one of our big remaining bugs as of when we're talking, I hope that by the time it shows I've got it fixed, is that you can see the power lines through the clouds when you're flying above them. And that's because both power lines and clouds are not solid things in X-plane. Power lines can't be solid because they're so thin. You actually have to render them a little bit transparently so that your brain thinks they're really small unless you get really close to them. And so you're flying, you can see the power line grid. That look, you can tell that's wrong. You should have no idea what's going on the ground when you're above an overcast layer, right? So that's a bug, right? It's a bug in the new clouds. We have to fix it. But how do we fix it? And the answer is you have to build this new thing with a Froxel cache and some ray marching. And that doesn't really sound like a bug, right? That sounds like a new toy, right? So is that feature creep because we're going to build a new toy? Or is that just bug fixing because we need to get the feature complete? Right. And so we have to make this call for almost everything we do. And one of the things we look at is how much, will this open up a whole new can of worms, or this just trying to seal off what we already have? So what we're trying to do is complete what we've already started, but try to hold off on, starting a whole new subsection of the sim where the scope would get out of control. And if you have a bug like that where it's really, really visible, I mean, the power lines got reported by pretty much everybody in the alpha, right? You can tell when a bug is severe when you just get the same thing over and over, and you're going, wow, if we ship
Hmm.
this, like every user is going to say the same thing on day one. Like, what am I doing wrong? Is there something wrong with my GPU? Like, you can't ship a bug like that. So those ones are hard, but we're trying to limit to what's possible with the current rendering tech. And maybe we say, okay, here's another thing we'll do in another update that's a whole nother level, but this is going on to the next mountain, and so that's where you have to draw the line.
Fair enough. Sounds like something you can do really well, but not me, that's for sure. And that's probably why you got so many bug lists with your name next to it as well.
It's hard to draw the line. I think everybody on the team would like to keep pushing the envelope as far as we can, right? And this
Hmm.
is definitely not a release where we've said, "Oh yeah, when we're done with flight sim, nothing more to do." I've been fortunate because I've been doing this for just about 2 decades, and there's always been another big thing to do. There's always another mountain to climb, and we even can look at what we have now and say, "Huh, here's a whole section we didn't even touch. That this will be a big deal in the future." And I've worked on products that are not like that, where you do a pretty good job and then your users are happy, and then they don't really want to buy upgrades. They're done. You've solved the problem and you can go home, right? And
Hmm.
that's very hard for a business. But flight sim, there's always been more to do. You can always get closer to reality, and as the hardware grows, it becomes possible to do more. So, it's a good problem to have.
Absolutely. So we spent some time talking about the existing developers and how you guys are supporting them and what we can expect in terms of add-ons. But I want to kind of turn that attention to potentially newcomers who want to develop for the hobby. So you've briefly mentioned about SDK and documentation. Very if you could explain very basically, how could someone get involved with developing an X-Plane add-on? Where should they start looking for any sort of documentation and stuff like that?
Right. So just about all of our documentation is on developer.xplane.com. It kind of depends on what kind of add-on you want to make. If you want to make a plugin and write some code, we have the developer docs, but we also have sample plugins. So maybe you find a sample that's close to what you want to use. And you can download those and they're ready to compile and use immediately. So for programmers, they can kind of get a head start and then they can get into the docs to find out, well, how do I do X? How do I do Y? People who aren't quite as technically minded can use Lua, which is a more friendly scripting language. And there's actually a whole community of modders who are using Lua to poke at the sim and hack it. And that's accessible. I'm hoping in the long term we'll be able to bridge that gap a little bit and have the easier to program languages be more full featured and closer to what you can do with, scary industrial languages like C. Just so that all ranges of programmers can use the sim. If you want to make scenery, you want to probably start with World Editor. A really good way to start is making airports for the gateway. You can get used to picking out library assets and placing them and designing an airport. And you get a really nice result pretty quickly because the art assets are made by our art team. And so they've really been carefully built to look good. And then if you say, well, yeah, but I'd really like to make my own stuff, you can pick up Blender. And Blender's free. It runs on every platform. And they've reached a point where the UI has really gotten polished. If you go back 10 years, people go, oh, Blender, that's that terrifying program with a UI that looks like it came out of an elephant or something. Like, what happened here? But now it's really quite usable. You install our exporter, and all of a sudden, all the X-Plane information for your add-ons are right there in the UI, and you can start modeling. And maybe there's this one hangar at your local airport, and you say, all right, I want to build that. It's this shape, and you place it in WED, and now you're getting started. And then you can go from there, and maybe you want to start adding orthophotos, or maybe you want to start creating your own DSFs. And we have documentation to do all those things, but you can also start small and just add a little bit and go from there. The same thing kind of applies to aircraft. You could start by just painting a livery, right? You only need a paint program to do that. And now you can see your favorite airline, or maybe it's your own custom. You've just got a red stripe because that's what you want, right? And you can start like that, and then you can start looking at, well, can I change how the aircraft flies? You can open up the aircraft in Plane Maker. You can hot rod our fleet. A thing I used to do was grab our aircraft and just add JATOs to all the props, so they can go a little faster, because Plane Maker is completely flexible. You can add anything to anything you want. And then maybe you say, okay, I'm going to actually do a full aircraft. I'm going to model the aircraft in 3D using Blender, and I'm going to build the airframe from scratch. So you can work your way up until you reach a higher level. I will say that developing the top tier add-ons for flight simulators has become very, very complicated. If you go back to when I started doing this, one person could build an airplane pretty much by themselves in a pretty short amount of time, because there just wasn't that much you could make a gaming PC circa 2001 do. It wasn't that powerful. It had 4 megabytes of VRAM. Like, how much are you going to do with that, right? You could add one texture to it, right? And that was the paint. And you probably cut that out of Google or something and paste it on, and that's all you could do. And now, right, we have these complicated material models. The level of 3D is super deep. The entire interior is modeled. Everything works inside the cockpit. The avionics are a pretty good stand-in for the real avionics. So the very top has gotten very complicated and very labor intensive. But there's intermediate stops you can do along the way. So I would never want to tell anyone, no, this is complex. You can't. No, people should try it. And X-Plane has always been very accessible for tinkering and experimenting, which is how a lot of people who work for Laminar Research started. And we have a lot of ex-tinkerers who kind of got in and said, well, what does this thing do here? What happens if I poke this? And, it's a good way in.
Yeah, I was just actually going to say what I found very fascinating through doing these deep dives with you and Daniela and Austin and everybody else on your team is just how many of you got started by just tinkering and just playing around just because you were passionate about a very specific thing, and one thing led to another, and here you are making a fully fledged simulator. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting talking to each and every one of you and learning your stories throughout as well. So I have a few kind of normally I like my questions to kind of flow into one another, but I've just got a bunch of miscellaneous questions which didn't really fit in anywhere. So I hope you can just spend a few minutes just talking about them. So the first one we've briefly talked about, compatibility with third-party hardware. So we've touched on a little bit about VR controllers and stuff, but is there any other hardware that you want to highlight that might be different from X-Plane 11, or is basically anything that was compatible before is now compatible with X-Plane 12.
I don't think we've dropped anything that anyone is going to be sad about. We made one very specific drop, which is X-Plane 12 will not support hardware that uses a serial port, an RS-232 serial port, because it's 2022, and this kind of hardware was manufactured like decades ago, right? And we've had this theoretical, oh, you can use a serial port, and we're all going, none of us have serial ports anymore. We have no idea if this works. Like, does anyone have hardware to test? No. So we cut this off. Like honest to God, I have no idea if it works in 11. We've said, we're not even going to look in X-Plane 12. But everything that connects via USB should just work. All the joystick support should just work. We've got the same set of configs, and we're adding more joystick presets. If you have a plugin that drives specialized hardware, I believe the plugin should just work. We haven't dropped any plugin features that you would need. So it should be pretty good for almost everything else. All the HMDs for VR that worked should keep on working. So yeah, other than serial ports, I think we should only have a wider hardware compatibility situation. And fortunately, most hardware is pretty well behaved now. It's a lot of the times when we find out about a new stick, you plug it in and it's got a bunch of axes and we can get it working, and it's pretty straightforward.
Perfect. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people out there with hardware be very pleased to hear that, thinking they won't have to go and invest in new stuff. Cool. So you mentioned VR. Is there been any significant changes with virtual reality with X-Plane 12 over X-Plane 11?
We have not done a major VR overhaul. All the VR work we've done, and I was literally fixing VR bugs right before this call, have been to get VR working with the new renderer. So the classic VR bug is my right eye is broken for some reason, because the left eye, that's the one that shows what you would have seen on screen anyway, and so it almost always works. And then the right eye is that extra thing you have to do for VR. And so we put some new feature and then we go, look at that. So last night we discovered that there were no 3D trees in the right eye, only the left eye. On the left eye, they were perfect. They waved up and back, and the right eye was deforested, like classic VR bug. So, we're trying to make sure that all the new features work well in VR. And that includes reaching a fairly high quality bar, because in VR, your head's always moving. You can really sense flickering and things. But we're maintaining the same basic VR experience. And we do want to do a pretty significant VR upgrade after we ship. One of the major requests there is more third-party plugin access. When we first did VR, we weren't entirely sure which parts of the system were going to work well and which ones would go, yeah, we need to do another pass. So we didn't give complete plugin access to everything. And that's one of the universal things we hear is, oh, we wish our add-on could do this in VR. So opening that up quite a bit is is high on the priority list. There's some headsets we'd like to improve support for after we ship. So I think we're going to get to it and do another major update for this version. X-Planes VR plus the new graphics realism has been the major target.
Cool. Amazing. I'm sure there'll be plenty of VR people who are watching this going, phew, can't wait for those updates and stuff. So the final question, again, very miscellaneous, is X-Plane 11 is well known for being FAA certified and used in flight schools and other training environments. Is that something you're planning for X-Plane 12 in the future, or would it kind of be as part of the initial release package?
So X-Plane 11 is certifiable, right? The FAA doesn't come in and say, okay, this software package is certified for any use no matter what. Like, I've got X-Plane 11 on the laptop we're talking on, and it doesn't mean that my laptop is a certified flight training device, right? With a trackpad to fly the plane. We make sure X-Plane is certifiable when combined with the right hardware by making sure that the stuff we do in software is all up to spec, right? In terms of flight dynamics, in terms of realism of rendering. And that is absolutely our goal for X-Plane 12 as well. I believe we will be able to reach at least the same levels of certification with 12 out of the box as 11, and we are aiming for higher as well. But with every certification, you really only know when some customer does it, right? Once they build that sim and have the FAA inspector come in and run down the checklist, like that's when we'll know. But we've always considered the pro market like one of our core things, and we've never said, "Oh yeah, this is only in the home version, so we're gonna phone it in." We try and get that level of realism just always on all the time, and I think we're gonna be able to do that for 12 as well.
Perfect. Well, that wraps up all of the questions I've had for all of our deep dive videos. Is there anything else you want to add or talk about before we close for the day?
I think we've covered most of it. Maybe it's a shout out to the team who's been busting their asses trying to fix bugs and get things complete to get this. This is a really huge release for us. Like we went into the restaurant and we said, 40-ounce steak, sign us up, right? Because we're trying to put so much stuff in, and that's been a real challenge. It's just been a tremendous amount of work, and I've appreciated how much effort everyone has put into trying to get everything sealed up and locked down so that we can get this to our users.
Yeah, I think everyone's, from your initial announcement on, well, even before the announcement at Flight Sim Expo, you kind of did a few teasers and stuff like that, which were obviously very interesting. But then when that big announcement came out and you did like a 30-minute presentation, I think that's what turned heads, and having that center stage at Expo really helped with that initial exposure. And it's been, from my perspective and from the rest of our team, it's been fascinating talking to you all and seeing that passion and enthusiasm that you guys are really packing into X-Plane 11, X-Plane 12, sorry, well, and X-Plane 11 from the past. But yeah, it's when we first had these conversations about it'd be really cool to do this with you guys, the focus really wanted to be about the people behind the simulator, and I'm hoping that through, I think, around 9 or 10 episodes now, we've put that across, and hopefully the community has seen not just kind of the code or the simulator itself, but also the people who do work really hard to create it
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, and we have other engineers and artists who are not in the series, and they're still just as involved. They've got all these different backgrounds. Some of them are pilots. They came in through different ways of getting into simulation, and it's a unique team. And I think we have a really good mix of skills that help us create X-Plane, because it's a very wide domain. Like everything that goes into a simulator, you have to have these really, really, really good aerodynamics, but then all this other stuff too, because people want to fly in a world. So, I there's a lot of contribution that goes into it.
Excellent, and I think that effort really comes through from all the images and the videos that we're seeing from X-Plane 12, and we can already see the improvements even from the original announcements a couple months ago and kind of where you guys are today.
With that in mind, if the team is watching this, you guys got to get back to work. You guys should be fixing bugs. What are you doing watching this? Come on. Back to the salt mines.
Whip them into shape.
Yes,
cool. Well,
the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Well, I didn't say that. Ben did. But Ben, thank you so much, honestly, for taking the time to talk to me. I know you're busy fixing VR bugs, and I'm sure they'll get resolved. But honestly, thank you so much. And thank you to the rest of your team who've also taken part in all of these deep dive episodes, and also to the people who didn't take part, who are still very much part of the X-Plane team, who are producing X-Plane 12. And on behalf of everybody as well from FSElite, myself included, thank you so much for watching this deep dive series. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope you've learned something new from all of the content we've produced, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
All right, thank you.